By 2050, Africa will be home to half of the world's under 21 population. Either this could be one of the greatest opportunities in its history or a complete catastrophe for the world. In this video, I'll make the case that the former is more likely. In my last video on the continent, I explained in a couple of points why Africa is the way it is today. My first point was neocolonialism. But now, the West of today isn't the West of the past 70 years that has been plundering the continent. With populist leaders like Trump in the US, and with Western Europe now focused more than ever on the Ukraine security issue, we have so far seen the dismantling of the USAID program and the expelling of French troops from the Sahel region. This kind of Western meddling did not plunder resources directly, but like I'd mentioned in my previous video, it helped prop up dictators who were not answerable to their people at all, but rather ruled for the purpose of resource extraction and dividing said resources between themselves and their foreign allies abroad. But beyond the West's withdrawal, have Africans actually reacted? And the answer is yes. We can see that with the arrival of Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso and the creation of the Alliance of Sahel States, which proves that in the absence of the West, Africans have the drive to create institutions that genuinely benefit them. This is just one example from West Africa. In Rwanda, President Paul Kagame has completely built past the genocide as well as colonialism and built a country out of a tragedy that would have otherwise left it completely scarred. But people aren't the only ones letting go of colonialism. Even commerce is starting to reflect the future instead of the past. Here's why. With the African Continental Free Trade Area put into effect since 2021, free trade between countries is starting to become a way for ethnic communities to cooperate instead of being at each other's throats. Current intra-African trade sits at about 15% compared to 60% within the European Free Trade Area. This really reflects colonial legacy since historical infrastructure within the continent was meant to link mines towards ports, which would then export towards Europe, instead of linking cities with one another. However, thanks to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, this could easily be bumped up to 50% of intra-African trade. So this could, just like what the EU did for Europe, build trust between ethnic communities that previously could have hated each other. Lagos, Nairobi, Accra, Kinshasa, Kigali, all of these big African bustling cities are worth taking note of. As urbanization progresses and people start moving physically from subsistence farming into jobs that are provided within the cities, their identity starts shifting as well. So instead of identifying with their local ethnic group, they slowly start to shift away from their ethnic identity and more towards their nationality and sometimes even the continent itself, preferring to identify as Africans. Again, a comparison can be made with Europe during the Industrial Revolution. Nationalism only truly started because people from all of these different regions had to cooperate within the same factory, wear the same clothes as well, etc. While this is nice and all for Africa's internal affairs, the real big switch will come as it's able to leverage as developed countries start needing more and more of its critical resources. I'll give you an example. The Democratic Republic of Congo holds 70% of the world's cobalt supply, which feeds electric vehicle batteries. And then Zimbabwe and the DRC again hold a massive chunk of the world's lithium supply, also needed for batteries. South Africa produces the world's platinum for hydrogen fuel cells, and then the Sahel produces uranium for European nuclear programs. And since the developing world has made these legally binding net zero commitments, Africa, or rather African countries, now have the opportunity to cooperate with one another when it comes to these different minerals rather than competing with one another. And while on the topic of advanced technologies, it can be said that Africa, in a lot of cases, has a lot of catching up to do. It can actually be said that its lack of legacy infrastructures actually give way to much easier technological progress and adoption. And I'll give you an example. In Rwanda, there's medical drones that are being used to transport to these remote hospitals either medical equipment or organs, which is an innovation that ends up being even quicker than traditional transport. And why is this? Because, you can't build roads towards these places, because imagine building a road in this kind of terrain. Or take Kenya's M-Pesa mobile banking app, which invented mobile banking before the West ever even bothered to. And so basically this shows that even though Africa is behind on a lot of things, in some cases it's actually just unencumbered. But then there's the human wave, you know, the hook of the video. By 2050, roughly half of the world's youth will be in Africa. But here's the more important detail that either makes or breaks this estimate. Will there be enough jobs to accommodate them? And this question is really important to answer because this will define whether Africa will become an even bigger nest for migrants or whether it will be the powerhouse of the next 100 years. And so I would argue, with the arguments presented previously, that Africa is actually starting to build the structures necessary to answer that question when the year comes. And I mean, the political consciousness of this generation is already fomenting. The hashtag #EndSARS movement in Nigeria actually forced the government's hand in conceding. And then Senegal's 2024 election brought in an anti-corruption president who was overwhelmingly voted in by young voters. And then Kenya for the past 2 years has been seeing rampant protests organized entirely through social media. For example, they'll see a police officer abusing his monopoly of violence to beat a protester. You know what happens? They record it, it's shared online, it goes viral, and then within minutes on WhatsApp, his address will actually end up being leaked, and then suddenly he'll have protesters knocking at his door asking for justice. To be honest, we should have this in Europe. Why don't we have this in Europe? Well, it's really because people wait for mainstream news outlets to tell them what to do. And here's another case of legacy infrastructure, huh? And speaking of things we should do in Europe, even in Madagascar, they ousted their president and removed his nationality because he fled to France. And who did all of this? The Gen Z generation here in Africa. So to summarize, Africa has huge potential. And will it revert to its old ways when it matters the most? Maybe, but through the arguments I've presented here, I sincerely don't think so. And especially after being here for quite a while. Obviously, the good old saying,
"This is Africa,"
still applies, but it's starting to look less and less like that as time goes on. And maybe I'll make a video again 3 decades from now to see if I was really right. But until then, next week, video on leftism and immigration. Ooh, real spicy. Okay, bye-bye.
American, huh?
Guilty,
Well, Americans usually are.
says the white South African.
I'm from Rhodesia.
We say Zimbabwe now, don't we?
Do we?
Oh, for fuck's sake! Oh, putain!